What's up, history seekers? Welcome back to Neural Battlefields, where we dive deep into the conflicts that shaped our world. Today, we're uncovering one of the most shameful chapters in imperial history, a story so dark that it involves forcing an entire nation into drug addiction for profit. This is the story of the Opium Wars, where the British Empire weaponized narcotics, shattered a civilization, and changed the course of global power forever. If you think modern drug cartels are ruthless, wait until you hear what one of the world's most civilized empires did in the name of trade. Hit that like button, because this journey is going to be intense. It's the early 1800s, and China is the most powerful, self-sufficient empire on Earth. For thousands of years, Chinese civilization has thrived with advanced technology, rich culture, and economic independence. The Qing dynasty rules over roughly one-third of the world's population. China produces silk, tea, and porcelain that the rest of the world desperately wants. Meanwhile, the British Empire is expanding across the globe, colonizing lands, extracting resources, and building what will become the largest empire in human history. But there's a problem, a massive, expensive problem. Britain is absolutely obsessed with Chinese tea. The British aristocracy can't get enough of it. Tea has become so integral to British culture that it's consumed at every level of society, from the working class to the royal family. Millions of pounds of tea are imported from China every single year. But here's the catch. China doesn't want anything Britain has to offer. The Chinese Empire is completely self-sufficient. They have everything they need within their own borders. The emperor looks at British goods, woolen textiles, manufactured items, and basically says, "No thanks, we're good." So what does Britain have to do? They pay for tea in pure silver. Massive amounts of silver are flowing out of Britain and into China, creating a trade deficit that's bleeding the British economy dry. The British government and the East India Company, the powerful corporation that controls British trade in Asia, are watching their silver reserves vanish. They need a solution, and they need it fast. But instead of developing products the Chinese actually want, or accepting the trade imbalance, they come up with something far more sinister. Enter opium. The British discover that they control vast poppy fields in India, particularly in Bengal. Opium derived from these poppies is a highly addictive narcotic. The East India Company realizes they have found their solution. If they can get the Chinese population addicted to opium, they can reverse the trade imbalance. It's brilliant in its cruelty, it's profitable in its evil, and it's about to destroy millions of lives. The British begin smuggling opium into China through corrupt merchants and criminal networks. At first, it's a trickle. Then it becomes a flood. Chinese smugglers and corrupt officials facilitate the trade, and opium dens begin appearing in Chinese cities. The drug spreads like wildfire. Farmers, laborers, soldiers, even government officials become addicted. Entire communities are devastated. Productivity collapses. Families are destroyed. The social fabric of Chinese society begins to tear apart. By the 1830s, the opium trade has completely reversed. Now, silver is flowing out of China and into British hands. The tables have turned, but at an unspeakable human cost. Estimates suggest that by 1838, somewhere between 4 and 12 million Chinese people are addicted to opium. Think about that number. Millions of human beings turned into addicts so that Britain could balance its trade books and maintain its tea habit. The Chinese government is horrified. The Qing emperor and his officials watch as their empire crumbles from within. They see the devastating impact of this foreign poison. They issue edicts banning opium. They execute dealers. They try to stop the flow of the drug into their country. But the British smugglers are backed by the most powerful navy in the world, and they have no intention of stopping their lucrative trade. In 1839, Emperor Daeguang has had enough. He appoints a special commissioner named Lin Zexu, a respected official known for his integrity and determination. Lin Zexu is given an impossible mission: end the opium trade. When Lin arrives in Canton, now known as Guangzhou, the center of foreign trade, he doesn't mess around. He surrounds the foreign quarter and demands that all foreign merchants surrender their opium. He writes a letter to Queen Victoria, appealing to her sense of morality. In this letter, he asks a simple question. If opium is so harmful that it's banned in Britain itself, why is it acceptable to sell it to China? The letter never receives a response. Queen Victoria probably never even sees it. Instead, Lin Zexu takes direct action. When British merchants refuse to surrender their opium, he blockades them in their factories. No food in, no one out. After weeks of pressure, the British merchants, led by the government representative Captain Charles Elliot, hand over more than 20,000 chests of opium. Each chest contains about 140 pounds of the drug. We're talking about roughly 1,400 tons of opium. Lin Zexu doesn't sell it or redistribute it. In a powerful symbolic gesture, he has it destroyed. Over 23 days, workers dig trenches, mix the opium with lime and salt, and flush it into the sea. It's one of the most significant drug busts in history. You might think this is a victory for justice, for sovereignty, for a nation trying to protect its people from a devastating drug epidemic. But Britain doesn't see it that way. The British government, influenced heavily by merchant interests and the East India Company, is outraged. They don't see the destruction of opium as a legitimate act of law enforcement. They see it as the destruction of British property. They demand compensation. They demand humiliation of China. They demand submission. When China refuses, Britain does something almost unthinkable. They declare war. Let that sink in. Britain launches a military invasion of China because China tried to stop British drug dealers from poisoning Chinese citizens. This is the First Opium War, beginning in 1839, and it's about to reveal the brutal reality of 19th century imperialism. The military mismatch is staggering. The British Navy has modern warships, steam-powered gunboats, and advanced artillery. The Chinese military, despite its vast numbers, is using outdated weapons and tactics. Chinese war junks, traditional wooden ships, are no match for British iron-hulled steamers that can sail against the wind and rain fire from modern cannons. British forces can strike anywhere along China's vast coastline, bombard cities, and retreat before Chinese forces can respond. The British strategy is ruthless and efficient. They blockade Chinese ports, strangling trade and causing economic chaos. They capture strategic positions along the coast. They sail up rivers, threatening major cities. In battle after battle, Chinese forces are overwhelmed. The technological gap is simply too wide. Chinese soldiers fight bravely, defending their homeland, but courage alone cannot overcome gunpowder and steel. One of the most significant moments comes when British forces capture the tax barges carrying revenue to Beijing. The Qing government suddenly cannot fund its own operations. The emperor faces a terrible choice: continue a war his military cannot win, or accept humiliating terms. In 1842, after 3 years of conflict, China surrenders. The Treaty of Nanking, signed in August 1842, is one of the most one-sided agreements in history. It's the first of what China will later call the Unequal Treaties. The terms are devastating. China must pay Britain 21 million silver dollars in reparations. That's compensation for the destroyed opium, war costs, and debts owed to British merchants. China must open 5 ports to British trade: Canton, Amoy, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai. British citizens in these ports are subject to British law, not Chinese law, a principle called extraterritoriality that treats China like it cannot govern its own territory. Most significantly, China must hand over Hong Kong Island to Britain in perpetuity. A piece of Chinese territory becomes a British colony, and it will remain so for over 150 years. The treaty also forces China to establish a fair and reasonable tariff, which really means China loses the right to control its own trade policy. And here's the kicker: the treaty doesn't even mention opium. There's no clause banning the opium trade. Britain has just fought a war to keep selling drugs to China, and they don't even have the decency to mention it in the peace treaty. The impact on China is catastrophic. The Qing dynasty's authority is shattered. If the emperor cannot protect his people from foreign invaders, what legitimacy does he have? The treaty ports become centers of foreign influence where Chinese law doesn't apply. The opium trade, far from ending, actually increases. More Chinese people become addicted. More silver flows out of the country. The Chinese economy, once the envy of the world, spirals into decline. But it gets worse. Other Western powers see Britain's success and want their piece of China too. France, the United States, and other nations demand similar treaties. They call this the most favored nation principle, meaning that any concession China gives to one foreign power must be extended to all of them. China is being carved up like a cake, and there's nothing the weakened Qing government can do about it. For a brief moment in the early 1850s, it seems like the opium issue might be resolved. The Taiping Rebellion, a massive civil war that will kill tens of millions of people, erupts in China. The rebels, influenced by a unique interpretation of Christianity mixed with Chinese traditions, oppose the Qing dynasty and the opium trade. But the rebellion creates more chaos than solutions, and foreign powers actually end up supporting the Qing government to protect their trading interests. Then in 1856 comes the Second Opium War, sometimes called the Arrow War. The British are looking for an excuse to renegotiate their treaty and gain even more concessions. They find it when Chinese officials board a ship called the Arrow, which was flying a British flag, possibly illegally. The British claim this is an insult to their flag. It's a flimsy pretext, but it's enough. This time France joins Britain. French missionaries have been killed in China, giving France its own excuse for war. The Second Opium War is even more brutal than the first. In 1860, British and French forces march inland and reach Beijing itself. They loot and burn the old summer palace, the Yuanminjuan, one of the most magnificent architectural complexes in the world. This palace contains centuries of Chinese art, historical artifacts, and cultural treasures. Foreign soldiers ransack it, stealing whatever they can carry and burning the rest to the ground. The destruction of the Summer Palace is an act of cultural vandalism that still resonates in China today. It's not just a military defeat, it's a deliberate humiliation, a message that China's cultural heritage means nothing to these foreign invaders. The emperor flees Beijing. His empire is on its knees. The Treaty of Tientsin, signed in 1858 and ratified in 1860, forces even more concessions. China must open additional ports, allow foreign diplomats to reside in Beijing, permit Christian missionary activity throughout the country, and pay even more reparations. And for the first time, the treaty explicitly legalizes the opium trade. Britain has now forced China to accept the very poison that started this entire nightmare. The consequences for China are profound and long-lasting. The Opium Wars mark the beginning of what Chinese historians call the Century of Humiliation, a period from the 1840s to the 1940s when China suffers defeat after defeat at the hands of foreign powers. Japan, seeing China's weakness, will invade and colonize parts of China. European powers will establish spheres of influence. China's sovereignty will be violated again and again. The psychological impact is equally significant. For thousands of years, China viewed itself as the Middle Kingdom, the center of civilization. Suddenly, that worldview is shattered. Chinese intellectuals and reformers begin questioning everything about their society. If China's traditional systems couldn't protect the nation from foreign invasion, what good are they? This crisis of confidence will eventually contribute to the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911 and the tumultuous decades that follow. But let's not lose sight of the human cost. Millions of Chinese people suffer and die from opium addiction. Families are destroyed. Children grow up in poverty because their parents spend everything on the drug. The social and economic development of China is set back by generations. And all of this happens because one empire decided that its commercial interests were more important than human lives. The Opium Wars also reveal the dark heart of imperialism. We often hear about the civilizing mission of European empires, the supposed benefits they brought to colonized peoples. The Opium Wars strip away that pretense. Here, we see imperialism in its rawest form, violence in service of profit, regardless of the human cost. The British Empire, which prided itself on rule of law and Christian values, became the world's largest drug cartel. It's worth noting that not everyone in Britain supported the Opium Wars. The young politician William Gladstone, who would later become Prime Minister, spoke against the war in Parliament. He called it unjust and dishonorable. He said that the British flag had never been hoisted in a worse cause. But voices like his were drowned out by commercial interests and imperial ambition. The legacy of the Opium Wars continues to shape our world today. China's determination to never again be humiliated by foreign powers drives much of its modern foreign policy. The return of Hong Kong to China in 1997 was a deeply symbolic moment, closing a chapter opened by the Treaty of Nanking 155 years earlier. When you hear Chinese leaders talk about sovereignty and non-interference in internal affairs, they're drawing on this historical memory. The Opium Wars also remind us of the devastating impact of the drug trade. Today, we grapple with opioid epidemics, cartels, and the violence of the illegal drug market. The dynamics aren't so different from the 1800s. Enormous profits, addiction, corrupted officials, and shattered communities. The scale might be different, but the human suffering is just as real. Understanding this history helps us see how the modern world was shaped. The rise of Western dominance, the decline of traditional Asian empires, the patterns of global trade, the resentments that still simmer beneath the surface of international relations. All of these have roots in events like the Opium Wars. History isn't just about the past. It's about understanding how we got here and where we might be going. So what can we learn from this dark chapter? First, that economic systems without moral constraints can produce monstrous outcomes. When profit becomes the only value that matters, when human suffering is just an externality to be ignored, atrocities become possible. Second, that technological and military superiority don't make you right. Britain had better weapons, but that didn't make their cause just. Third, that the consequences of historical injustices echo through generations. The humiliation China experienced in the 19th century still influences Chinese thinking in the 21st century. The Opium Wars were not some obscure conflict in a distant time. They were a pivotal moment that shaped the modern world order, demonstrated the brutality of imperial capitalism, and left scars that still haven't fully healed. They remind us that empires built on exploitation and violence eventually face a reckoning, even if it takes generations. That's the story of the Opium Wars, a tale of drugs, empire, and global humiliation that deserves to be remembered, understood, and learned from. If this deep dive into history opened your eyes to a chapter you might not have known about, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Subscribe to Neural Battlefields for more explorations into the conflicts that changed our world. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. How do you think the Opium Wars still influence global politics today? Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember that understanding our past is the first step toward building a better future. This is Neural Battlefields, signing off.